Helen del Guidice, the curator of exhibits and collections at the Miller Art Museum in Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin. And this is the 6th edition of The Studio Door. Today I'm going to sit down with Cristian Andersson, the artist in residence at the Trout Museum in Appleton, Wisconsin, and emerging artist Alyssa Krause from Milwaukee. They are two of the artists whose works are currently on exhibit in From Deep Within, the Meditations of Wisconsin Abstractionists, which is located on the Ruth Morton mezzanine of the Miller Art Museum until February the 26th. You can see the works on display behind me. I'm joined now by Cristian Andersson from his studio in Appleton. Hello, Cristian. How are you today?
I'm great, Helen. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here and talk to us. We're very excited to have your works. You know, it's a little bit groundbreaking for us. Number one, this is one of the largest paintings we've ever exhibited here. It's amongst the largest. So that's a little bit historic for the Miller Art Museum. And also having a full exhibit that is not our permanent collection on the mezzanine is also. So thank you for participating.
No, I really appreciate the opportunity and how you're kind of expanding things that are going to be shown at the Miller. It's fantastic, so thank you.
So give us a little bit of background about you first. Right now you're the artist in residence at the Trout Museum. But you're writing a newspaper. You have
Correct.
Things going on for yourself.
Appleton at the Trout Museum of Art. There I'm doing mostly painting. However, I have been working with doing some collaborative work also, doing more performance work. And I think we'll get a chance to talk about that sort of thing. Along with my painting, which typically falls in abstraction, I teach some classes through the Trout, just kind of small little introductory to painting type things, as well as some art history classes. I also it's a program called Spark, which is working with people who are living with memory loss and working with them and their care partners and talking about them through the arts to kind of make connections. And so those are things in my art practice that I do. And then you're correct, I also run a newspaper. It's just a small community print arts journal that I run with Katerina Abderholden. She's kind of my collaborator on a lot of artistic projects. And the paper, which is called FSM, is really looking to highlight the unique artists in our area that sometimes get overlooked. Also, it's an opportunity to give people a chance to learn about what goes on in contemporary dance or goes on in a gallery space like what you have at the Miller Art Museum. Maybe people who don't always know where to go or if they can go or, and learn something about what these artists are doing. And so we're kind of making this paper and putting it out into the world and trying to introduce a wide range of people to what's happening in contemporary art. Really, one of the reasons is if we're going to do abstract work in Wisconsin, in our area of Wisconsin, it's probably good to have some kind of introduction and give people a sense of familiarity with what we're working with. So
that's really smart and and necessary, and it relates to this very exhibit, which was founded on the idea of, I asked you when we first met, what is it? What is abstract art? What is the thinking going on in your mind? What is your philosophy? But I think there is, still to this day, the expectation of abstract art that, you have to find a figure in it. You have to know what it is, when really it's a philosophical meditation.
It really is. I was reading about an artist who was saying that he actually, even though he did work that we would call abstraction, he was saying that he was really getting frustrated with the idea of calling something abstract art or an abstraction, because then it's saying that we need to pull it from something real. But really, it's just in itself. it's an emotion. It's not an abstraction of an emotion. It's an actual emotion that you're seeing. And that's been something I've been thinking about a lot right now on how I classify what I do. Is it really an abstraction, or is it just its own reality?
Exactly. In a lot of ways, because there is that idea that abstract is something that is removed from something else, right? But the inspiration for your works is not a tangible object, right? So Alyssa Krause works from, tangible.
Correct.
She rearranges and then abstracts. You, however, are working with the intangible. You're painting from emotion. You're painting inspired by music.
I have a couple main lines of work that I do with my painting. And you have examples of both of them in your gallery space. The main one is when I am doing abstractions for music, specifically contemporary classical music. I love to hear the instrumentation and how composers ask their musicians to play certain instruments. But then also, which is super interesting to me, is how the composer and how it's recorded and how all these sounds are placed in space. I call them soundscapes, static soundscapes, because when I listen to something, I can hear those harsh notes that might be coming out of a violin or these soft marimba. And just like in a painting where you can layer things and you can see visually how things are placed by the choice of the artist, I'm trying to internalize what the composer decides and how these sounds should be layered in space, and then trying to recreate that and be inspired by that on the canvas.
Creating a visual version of it.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Creating a visual version of the same thinking, the same decision making.
Correct. And so I'll take certain instruments and I'll latch on to them. Like one of the pieces that you have at the Mill Art Museum is a Finnish composer working in Paris. Her name's Kaija Saariaho, and she works with 3 different instruments in over a 20-minute piece. And the piece that you have in your gallery space is based off of one of the movements. And she only works with 3 instruments, a piano and a viola, and just kind of trying to understand and a cello, and trying to understand the personas that she has allowed into her musicians and the voices that they use through these instruments. And then I try to take those same sounds and try to understand the conversations that these musicians are having through music, through sound. Just like us talking, right? There's no difference. But instead of painting you and me talking, I'm trying to paint how the cello and piano interacted with each other, which is a challenge, but I absolutely adore working like that.
You are very attached to language and communication in, for lack of a better word, an abstract sense. You are not attached to the word or the phonetics or the physicality of letters per se, but you are concerned with how words affect things such as memory, or how time plays on language, or what we are consuming, as in your piece Social Amnesia. You did a project called Social Amnesia, where you're tracking the information off of social media, such as news items, news clips, anything that's being sort of released on social media, and you were tracking it in real time. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, what it was a project that I did because I noticed people were being so consumed through, their Twitter feeds or social media, and everyone was just spending so much time looking at their phone and scrolling through and trying to take in all this information on a constant basis, and it was almost impossible to get away from. And I had made mention to some people that I didn't know if spending so much time trying to take in this information was always the healthiest thing to do. But it's hard to ask someone or inform someone that maybe what they're doing isn't always the best for them. And as an artist, I have the capability to share visually or through some means how I see that actually happening. So what I did, and you're correct, it was a live input of a Twitter feed, and it was 6 months long. And what I did was I wrote down everything that came across in my feed. And when I would, in the beginning, you know, I'm a fairly political person, and I was following certain people and kind of getting one perspective of what was being shared online. And then I realized that if I only paid attention to that, I would only be paying attention to half the story of what's going on in the world. And so I was following people left and right and far right, and I was following some artists and some art critics and some, you know, musicians and some comedians to give me a break and things like that. And then if someone retweeted someone, I would follow that person and start writing down what they were writing. And what ended up happening was I wrote down something that I called the scriptorium, which was or is 9 feet tall by almost 40 feet wide of tiny script. And when you come into the space and you look at all this writing, you see, you might not, unless you get very close, you're not going to actually see it. But from a distance, you're going to see that there were school shootings. You're going to see what happened with the Me Too movement. That's actually when it all started. Me Too had just started. I didn't know what it was, but everyone was saying it. And so I'm writing down Me Too, Me Too, Me Too. And then later on, I figured out what was going on. But I cannot think of a better way to show so much history in one large piece, and then let people look at it and say, that's what I'm asked to consume, that's what I'm asked to deal with, and how good is it for me?
Well,
and then there was another...
Consume that information is in hyperspeed anyway, right? We're scrolling right past it. We're reading as much of this article, maybe just the headline, making a decision, moving on, making a comment, liking it, not liking it, whatever. And we're doing it at hyper speed. And yet you have this chunk of time where there's thousands and thousands of important pieces of information, some of it true, some of it not true,
right,
and asked to digest. I mean, it's a very multi-layered piece. And I think that all of your work seems to be that way, that you sort of build multiple layers into it. And from that piece, you also started off at one point to talk about memory with the White series. That's
correct.
That the White series was sort of born out of that, you know, one aspect of that conversation.
And you do have one of my pieces from the White series on display in your space. And the White series, the one that you have it was a portrait at first of a friend of mine. And you can still kind of see some of the curvature in the portrait itself. And so the White series, it could be a portrait, it could be a landscape, it could be an abstract piece. But what it is I take a piece to completion. And then systematically through different whites, a lead white, a titanium white, zinc white, radiant white from Gamblin, all these different whites, I start to paint out what was in the past. And it's different than just taking a painting and painting it out and making something new. The idea of me finishing something and then refinishing it is all part of this process. And what I would like is when people look at the White series and you see the curvature of that head, or you see some color, you know that there was something there prior. And the White series is all about things forgotten, or maybe more so the little things that you remember. I mean, think back to something that happened 5 years ago or 20 years ago. How much do you remember? Just those kind of highlights. What happens as a society if we start to forget some of the things that were important lessons, right? We make those same mistakes. And so the White series is talking about what happens when we forget lessons. The scriptorium then is the actual thing that's happening when we're trying to deal with things that we forgot about, and how to sometimes work together. And then at the cap end of this, I've created a line of work that is actually made to fall apart. And what it is there's these large paintings that have an unstable layer of ink underneath some heavy black paint. And in my head, at some point, it's going to start to flake off. So if we forget what we know and we get consumed and don't really pay attention to what's going on, this flaking series of paintings is a demonstration of maybe where we would be. And I'm just really trying to tell a story and saying, I think we need to slow down and we need to process what's going on and work together again. So
that's incredible. And I see that being repeated in all the series that you do. That one of the things, again, that I really intrigues me about your work and the different series that you're doing, that you've been working on, is just how multifaceted, how many conversations can be born from this base idea that you have. I mean, it's not, it's not such an outrageous idea to examine social media and its effects on us, but then to get into the memories and the interpretation and the deterioration of thought over time and etc. Let me ask you really quick. How important is it to you as an abstractionist? Is it that, there are, figurative elements in the work? I mean, does that matter to you? Is that something that you fight against or you welcome?
Well, I will say that when I finish a piece and I put it up on the wall and someone says, "Oh, I really like that big smiley head in the middle of the canvas," it sometimes can get to me because I certainly didn't intend for that to happen. I am not necessarily looking to have a figurative sense to my pieces. Now, I will say, and especially in the larger work, my line work that I work with does have a figurative sense. And meaning that it has shapes, it has line that feel very natural and feel like you're working with, looking at a figure in front of you or a face or something.
Some kind of identifiable object.
Yeah, and I think that comes, well, one, that's just my natural movement of how I like to move in space. But also when I'm working on one of these large canvases, and I was asked about why I'm working on these specific sizes, and I've come to the realization that I love to work with a piece that is as big or is as big as I am. It goes back to a different performance piece that I could talk about, but working with a painting that's the same size as you are means that there's no disparity between me as the artist and the finished piece, the painting. There is a dance going on. There's a fight going on. There's something happening where the painting's giving back to me as a person that I'm giving to them. And I think that because of that, I'm giving such life to these paintings that as I move, as I paint, that life comes into these more naturalistic lines, because I'm not seeing it as something that's just digitized or something that's just so abstract, but instead it's life talking back to me. And I think that's part of where those shapes come in that people see as faces or whatnot.
So you are actually, giving the painting as much physicality as you as an emotion as your person itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You,
John Cage, he's one of my touchstones, and he has a quote that I think about often where he's talking about artists in their studio and how you come into your studio and you come with your past and you come with your professors and you come with all these people into your studio and you start to work. And after time, all those other people fall away and it's just you and your work. And with any luck, you fall away also until it's just the work. And that's the point that I think I always want to get to with what I'm doing, because that's always what feels most real to me. I want the work to speak for itself.
and I think it does. And you can see it in the work. I mean, I definitely want to stand, when I talk to you and I look at the paintings, I can see so many physical similarities. When you start talking about your paintings, you start looking like your paintings, with your gestures and in your eye movement and etc. There is definitely a physical relationship. So with the symphonic series, you are actually, how you're tackling these is that you, with Sarajevo's paintings in particular, you are assigning each of the musical instruments a sort of character. It's almost literally like conducting a play in a certain way, right? You're giving them certain characteristics. And how does that physically play out on the canvas?
Yeah. So a lot of these recent symphonic pieces I've been doing, I'll listen to, let's say, that a cello note, and I'll think about, there certainly is what kind of emotion is coming out of this cello, and from those cellos you can think of certain sounds and shapes that are attributed to. But then also I think about certainly the color that's coming out of an instrument. And sometimes a cello, you might think that it will always have this warm sound, but if the cellist and the composer asks the cellist to play it in some kind of weird screechy noise, it's not going to be those oranges and reds that maybe pop into your head right away. So I really try to dissect what these sound, what it is that the composer is asking us to understand about the instrument. And I take those hints and I turn it into line work and shape. But then also, I've been working a lot with transparent paints and really trying to layer instrument on top of instrument. Because, well, at a certain point in a Sarajevo piece, like in the one that's directly in the back of the gallery, there's this rumbling sound, this tumbling noise, and what it is it's this piano that just has this terrific repetition of notes that kind of keep going through, and you'll see that kind of tumbling across the middle of the canvas. And that's just right up in front. And underneath, the cello is making these notes that kind of have these large shapes that are coming up. And it actually feels to me as if it is something being built. It feels like it's the Industrial Revolution coming to life through music. And so I take those shapes and those sounds and then think of the color. And the color, if this is something that's industrial, it's going to go to these steels and these blues and these blacks and something that's very, very metal-like. And so I use all of that to determine how those instruments are going to look in space, which could be completely different if the composer takes those same instruments and has them play lightly.
So let me ask you about some of the technicalities of that. Like, first of all, what kind of brushes are you using? What do your brushes look like? And second of all, how are you building this? It's quite typical to approach a painting by setting in a background putting in a ground and then, creating the forms and sort of mapping things out and then going in and you're not doing that at all, are you?
No. So to answer your first question, the brushes, I don't know if there's anything special about the brushes that I use, other than I guess I do use. Well, artists might say this brush is going to be reserved for this kind of color or whatnot, but I do have brushes that will sit and say these are going to be the piano brushes in this piece. This is going to sound.
Do you
What's that?
do you divide them up like that? Do you assign certain brushes to the various instruments?
I do, because I try to keep everything as true to the instrument as I can. And I don't know how to explain it more than I just try to, my tools, my colors, the shapes, they all are very specific to what I'm processing. And as I'm painting this, the Sarajevo piece that's back there was I think it's about 13-minute long piece. And I put it in my headphones and I listened to it over and over and over on repeat for 2 weeks at a time as I'm making something. And so I get to a point where if you listen to a song for 2 weeks on repeat, it almost becomes just this strange hypnotic sense. And so I think having my brushes saying these are my piano brushes makes life a lot easier and very automatic to grab what I need to grab when I'm working, because I get completely lost.
So do you listen to the piece once and, just start working with the piano, paying attention to what the piano's doing at this time and moving along with that, and then go back and listen to, say, the oboe or whatever other instruments are there?
Correct. I'll listen to a piece. First, I research what the piece is and if there's any inclination as to what the composer, why they made it, or if there's a backstory. For me, that's really interesting. But then I will listen to it on repeat and try to pull apart the different things that this composer and these instruments are trying to speak to me about. You ask about then how do I start to translate it into a painting. And what I do is I sit or stand, if it's a very large canvas, I stand in front of it for a ridiculously long amount of time and just look into this blankness and stare and start to think about what I've heard and thinking about how do these layer into this canvas. It's not necessarily mapping it out. I don't see something. I might have something like, I know in that one Sarajevo piece, I know that tumbling piano. I kind of know what that's going to look like. But I don't say, this is going to go here, this is going to go there, and I'm going to do that, because that is going to be way too planned, and it will have me in charge of the work and not myself in the work, working in tandem as things move along. So what will happen is I'll stare and I'll plan and I'll think about things. And then I listen to the music and I take these certain graphite pencils and I start drawing shapes, large shapes in space on the canvas. And then from there, I'll start to paint in. And then I'll go in and I'll do some drawing again and do some painting again. And it just kind of builds up on top of each other like that. There's points where I'll become terrified that if I do something to a certain section, I'll just completely destroy the painting. But similar to the White series, and maybe because of the White series, I realized that there isn't an inch of that canvas that shouldn't be sacrificed for the greater good. And it's really exciting to be able to layer things on top and to take something that seemed precious and completely change it and realize that the process has made it better. And so from an artist's perspective, that's really exciting for me when I work.
Yeah, that's got to be really freeing, because I think that is a huge burden that painters and all artists, but painters in particular, I used to call it masterpiece syndrome. That like every move that I did on the painting had to equate to the painting being a masterpiece in the end. So there was this massive fear of, ruining the part over there or making the wrong move over here and destroying its opportunity to be a masterpiece.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah,
like,
I totally encourage painters to make something and then just remake it. It's an amazing experience and it's very freeing. So, yeah.
well, that's really fascinating. I really appreciate it. What's coming up for you this year? I know that 2020 was a really challenging and busy year for you. What do you got planned?
Yeah, it was really hard. So right now, the paper that we talked about prior, that's on a couple month hiatus while things are kind of difficult to, well, people don't go to coffee shops freely and pick up newspapers right now. So there's going to be some interviews that are going to kind of go online in the place of the paper being out. I'm gearing up for some exhibitions. I have one that will be in September at the Center for Visual Art in Wausau. And that's going to be a new series of symphonic pieces, as well as then I love figuring out different ways to share a story. And so the idea is that the symphonic pieces then will be recreated through dance and having movement and the pieces happening at the same time in the same space. I think that there's just that, someone can look at a painting and have a certain impression, and then they can hear the music and have a different impression, and then they can be in the space with everything moving around them at the same time and come with something completely different. And I really love giving people options on how they want to start to approach what I'm doing, and I'm looking forward to sharing that work later this summer. So
Excellent. So lots of exhibitions and
yeah,
thing.
yeah,
So Christian, one of the things I do on the Studio Door is I ask each of my guests for their best piece of advice, either for young emerging artists out there or for anyone who is trying to establish themselves as an artist. What is your best piece of advice for these artists to get to a place where they feel completely in command of their work and they can start getting themselves out there?
yeah. A lot of artists and people, when they're starting off, don't always give themselves enough credit that they have a good idea on how to process things. It's really easy to look at someone who's more established or someone you follow on Instagram and you want to say, that's the point I want to get at. And you get to this point where I don't know if sometimes it's imposter syndrome, sometimes it's just looking at where you're at and saying, well, I'm not where I want to be. And you just need to give yourself credit that you can process things unique to yourself, and you have to trust that you can process that. Sometimes people are unsure that someone young or someone early in their career could understand something that someone older or further in their career has already worked with. And because of that, I think sometimes a certain fear comes in. And just don't let that happen. Trust that you have your own unique perspective and really go with it.
I think that's an excellent piece of advice. Thank you so much.
No,
On
thank
that
you.
note, I'm going to let you go. Christian Andersson, thank you so much for being here today. The exhibit is from Deep Within, Meditations of Wisconsin Abstractionists. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for your time. I'm so happy that I was able to be a part of this.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Alyssa, welcome.
Hi.
Hi. It's good to see you. Thank you for taking the time to be here.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and you just graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee in 2019.
hmm
You're a couple years out of your BFA, and you're currently represented by the Tapan Collective,
hmm
and you have a full-time job.
Yes, I'm busy, busy.
You're busy, and this is not the only exhibit that you're, participating in right now, is it? You have
hmm
another exhibit. Do you tell me about the other exhibit?
Yeah, so the other exhibit is at UW Parkside in Kenosha. It's another group show with a couple of other artists that are also Milwaukee based. It's Linnea Spreels and Danny McCullough, as well as myself. So it's a three-person show, all very different artists. Linnea is a figurative artist, Danny is a photographer, and then I myself am an abstract painter. So it's a lot of different things going on in one show.
That's great. That's cool. So it's, did you know these artists before the exhibit?
Yeah, I'm familiar with their work. They've been in shows in Milwaukee that I've gone to over the past years, so I'm very familiar with what they've been doing.
hmm Do you feel like there's a lot happening for young artists in Milwaukee, a lot of opportunities?
Yeah, I think Milwaukee has a good vibe. We have a lot of galleries out here that are very into like the contemporary art world and spreading that and making sure that that stays alive here. So I think that there's a lot of good community and good networking out here.
That's good. So the galleries and the museums are paying attention to what the young artists
hmm
are doing and creating opportunities for them.
Absolutely.
That's great. That's one of our goals here at Miller Art Museum, which is one of the reasons one of the many reasons I wanted you to participate in this show. So in this exhibit, I asked you and Cristian Andersson and Marjorie Mao, who's very well known locally, the question, what is it? And when I asked you that question, what I meant was, what was your philosophy? Because really creating abstract work is about a philosophy in a lot
hmm
of senses. So for you, with your paintings, which can be seen behind me, and we'll drop a few in, what is it?
So I'm very interested in using perspective as a vehicle for making paintings and thinking about like rules and how we can generate a response of familiarity, sorry, in something that we've never seen before, like in an unfamiliar form. And so I'm really interested in how the viewer is perceiving something and what goes on in our brains where we recognize something in an image.
And how do you approach these paintings? I know that you have a series of steps that you go through.
hmm
Tell us a little bit about that.
So I have some drawings here ready for you if you'd like to see. So I start off with like I take pictures of like nature, plant life, and then I crop the image to a point where it feels unfamiliar to myself. And then from there, I make a drawing. I don't know how well this is showing up,
It shows up.
but I basically make like a grid and a map of what's going to happen in each area using like an app on my phone that tells me like, oh, you should scumble here, or you should do straight paint or do a gradient here. So that way it's like a surprise to myself, even as the artist, to what's going on. And when I get to the end point, the painting is still unknown to me.
So you really set yourself up. You have a complete mapping of the painting before
hmm
you go into it.
Yeah, and the whole point of it is to kind of like separate myself from it because I don't want to necessarily know what I'm doing as I'm making because I like to be a part of the surprise as well as the viewer.
Mhm, That's interesting. How do you feel? So the technology, and you're doing this all on your phone and an app on your phone or
I just use an
computer?
app on my phone that like so it makes lists for you and then it selects from it randomly. So I'll put like a list of different ways to paint in my phone and then I press like choose randomly and then it chooses something for me. So then like when I'm making this, I'll like say, okay, this area. Then I go on my app and then decide like it decides for me what's gonna go there. So it's all at random.
But you take that, but you don't computer generate these images. I want to make that clear for
Mm-mm.
people. You are actually taking that back to the canvas with oil paint
Yes.
and then recreating what the computer sort of decided for you.
Yeah.
But you took the diagram. See, I think this is really fascinating. There's a lot of layers in that, a lot of steps involved with that in creating a diagram. So when you approach the canvas, do you take any liberties of, well, that was the plan, but I really want a little dark over here or a different color?
Yeah, so I've been playing around with that a little bit more lately because sometimes you'll take this and it'll make a whole mess and you won't like it. So sometimes the paintings don't turn out that great. And I've been taking more liberties because I've been able to kind of get that same surprise that I've been going for with this by kind of just making my own decisions and taking some liberties on the canvas and still being happy with the outcome of the painting.
That's really cool. Do you work in series? Do you have like a certain number of paintings that are reaching in a certain way for a certain kind of a look?
I don't necessarily like go into painting like trying to create a series of works, like mini works. But I do notice like a pattern of like the same palette or like the same ideas, like the ways that I make this. I'll do like a couple like the same way. Not like necessarily on purpose or anything, but just like me trying to work through my ideas in ways that I want to paint. Just it happens.
You get hot for certain colors for a while and then get bored with them and move on to something else.
Absolutely.
So it's just a continual sort of exploration, a wandering of exploration for you. That's really cool. I like it. So you're in your studio.
Yes, I am.
Tell me a little bit about this space.
So this is in like a giant warehouse building in Milwaukee. There's a bunch of floors here that have different artists working on them. And I share my space with a figurative artist, but it's really nice. I can flip the camera and show for a little bit. Yeah. So this is my space. There's not a lot in here right now because I have my work at all of those shows, but there's plenty of canvases getting ready to be made. I have like a painting storage rack back there with some older works, and then I have all my paints and stuff in the middle so I can easily access it.
So that's beautiful. Thank you. But you're using pretty traditional brushes and canvases. Do you use any kind of out of the box tools or anything like that?
I usually just use fluid acrylics for the base. I do like a wash and then I'll do oil paint on top of that. But I've been messing around with like mediums lately, and I have one that I started that has spray paint as the base, which I have never used on a painting before, so we'll see how that goes. But I did just make a painting that has like an iridescent ground on it, so the whole base of the painting has like this sparkly iridescence to it, and that one turned out really cool.
Nice. That's neat. I like that. Spray paint will go over acrylic pretty well.
Yeah.
I did some paintings years ago where I put spray paint over, an acrylic ground, and they're fine,
Yeah, I'm trying to like treat it as kind of like a cloudy, like atmospheric base to go off of, just to kind of break up the variation. Because I found when I start a painting on just like plain gessoed canvas that it's almost like too free, and then all of the forms don't really like blend and connect with each other. They kind of just feel free floating. So that's why I started doing the fluid acrylic base, and it gives it kind of like just a little bit of something to work off of.
Now, these works here that are on display at the Miller right now, they're very tropical in their color. They're clearly botanical in their shapes and the figures that they evoke. And when I first saw your canvases, I suppose that was early in 2020 or 2019, the work I think that you came out of school with. They were very heavy gem toned, and the spaces they were much more about depth of space than they were about these sort of objects competing for space on a same plane. So you have changed a little bit in how you're manipulating perspective.
I think part of that is just how I've like been learning how I paint, and I think that when those ones that came right after I left school were very like vibrant because that was the palette that I was kind of comfortable with at the time. and I was making like really dramatic drop shadows. And I think I've kind of learned from myself and been like trying to push myself to use, how I put it, ugly colors, because when I use ugly colors together, they make something that I wouldn't have expected, which is the whole point of it. So I've been experimenting with that and like starting out with different colors. And the last few that I've been doing have kind of been like a kind of like browns, oranges, purples with like some blues in there, which isn't necessarily what I was doing when I came out of school, but I like where they're going.
Is that what you consider ugly colors? What are your ugly?
I think like when I go to reach for a color, it's not going to be brown or orange usually. So I've been trying to challenge myself to use those because I see paintings all the time with like weird murky grays or browns or blacks, and I really love them, and they're super pretty how the colors are clashing with each other. Well, I shouldn't say clashing. They're doing great together, and I want to be able to do that. So I've been trying to use colors that I don't necessarily like but are beautiful in themselves.
You know, the paintings that Marjorie Mao presents in this do exactly what you're talking about. She takes, I'm not going to call them ugly colors, but she takes really surprising colors that I would not expect, and she's mixing them with grays and blacks and white. So sort of off chartreuses and really heavy toned, you know, magentas and burgundies and things like that. Maybe not the typical color that you would think. And then mixing them with a palette of grays and blacks and whites. It's
I'm all about that.
It's quite intriguing, you know. It's quite it's seductive.
Yeah, and then I, at the same time, I still like feel close to those like super vibrant colors, because I think sometimes those kind of go with what I'm trying to say through perception, and you're looking at something that you don't know, and vibrant colors don't necessarily happen like that in nature, like bright purples and fuchsia pinks you don't see as often. So I still try to like bring in little moments of that here and there.
And what is it about perception and that idea that, you know, I'm not exactly sure what I'm looking at, but I think it's something? Because that's the feeling to me that I think that you're striving for and that you're painting off. Like, you know, and I think that that's something that people want to do to abstract art in general. Like I look at an abstract painting, want to like find the figure in it.
Yeah.
Your paintings are kind of playing that game of where's the figure, you know?
Yeah, I think like all abstract art is trying to reach that, like, oh, what am I looking at? Or you are abstracting something, but I'm just like really interested in perception at its core and how each individual person, we all see things in a different way, even if we're looking at the same thing. And I'm just really trying to like pick that apart. I don't know. I've always been interested about like how I think compared to the person next to me, and how it's one in a million. Like no one else is thinking the same thing that I'm thinking about right now.
Does that translate to how you kind of relate to people in your life?
Yeah, I think it definitely,
or in their choices that they make.
I think it definitely stems from that, like the way that we like curate ourselves online. It's not necessarily like about that cliche, but that's kind of the underlying thing, is how we all present ourselves and the way that we perceive others. There's always a mix up or a domino, you know.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that Milwaukee and the arena that you're in down there has like a supportive network and opportunities and a foundation for the graduating artists, for the emerging artists. How does it look to you, the future? How does it look for, you know, from your generation's perspective, and then with your peers, like the art world in general, even outside of Milwaukee? Is there a future in the art world?
I think that there definitely is. I think the generation that I grew up are very hard workers. We're all like very geared towards our own success, and we're selfish in that way. So I think that we're all out to get whatever we need to get ahead, and we'll always look for those opportunities and make sure that we're networking and always creating. So I think that for young artists right now, it's a really good place to be in. Not necessarily during like the year that we are in right now and all of the troubles that we've gone through in 2020. But I think looking ahead, the art future is alive.
Do you utilize like, do you feel, because I noticed that a lot of artists, and especially with 2020, young and old artists, I'm not locating that with emerging or young artists, but I see that a lot of young artists are even saying to themselves, well, if the opportunities aren't here, I can create my own opportunities for myself online. I can literally be my own gallerist on Instagram or whatever other, app or, social media outlet there is. Do you
Yeah,
look for yourself?
I think Instagram has been a great tool for not just young artists, but all artists, because it is that instant gratification. You can share your work right there. It can be shared thousands of times, and you can make your own gallery or your creation on there. So I think that that's really great and successful for us because you can spread that work and get it seen instantly. For me, I I like to use Instagram. I don't really post on it as much as I think I should, but because I like to keep it kind of, I don't want to show the whole process of what I'm doing online. I kind of like to keep just like a little sneak peek here, sneak peek there, and then show the final work and you're like, wow, how did that happen?
Yeah. But you do like expose like little sneak peeks of your studio process and things like that.
Yeah, I like to show like detail shots and then like a zoom out, kind of what I've been doing in my studio.
Mhm. Mhm. And the last time we talked via Zoom about, a few weeks or maybe a month before the exhibit opened, you were working on a project and you were actually had taken some flower petals and some natural debris and put them into a Ziploc bag and then photographed them and then put them through this process of assigning the shapes and colors. Are there other ways that you like to sort of obscure? Because I think that is the process of abstraction, isn't it? In a really physical sense, that you're withdrawing these physical objects out of their understood nature further and further. First through the plastic bag, then through the photography, then through the drawing. You're, you know, in the same way that you degrade a photo file or something, you're moving it.
That painting in particular was a really interesting one because usually I just take a picture of nature straight on and then like zoom in and you're looking at what it is. But that one was like a bunch of crumpled up flowers that had already decayed, so they're already one step out of where they were, and then put into a Ziploc bag, which creates like a literal film over it, and then taking a picture and zooming in and then making it into a painting. So that one was basically completely deconstructed from what it was and then putting it back together in a painting. So I really want to play around more with doing things like that. I've done some based off of an image, and then I'll do a drawing and then make a map out of the drawing and then make a painting of that, which really separates it because you're working from a drawing, not from the actual image anymore. So to answer your question, yeah, I'd like to figure out like new ways of doing the Ziploc technique. I just have to find them still.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was a really neat process. You're sitting there sort of cutting things and putting them in a bag while we were talking, and I'm like, what are you doing? Yeah. So I'm going to let you go. I know it's late and you've been working. You
No
have
worries.
a full-time job. How much time do you get to spend in your studio?
So yeah, I do work full time. My schedule is pretty much Monday through Friday, so I'll try to get here both days on the weekend and just spend a whole weekend here basically. And then on my nights off from work, I typically prep and do drawings and stuff like that. So when I get to the weekend, I can just paint. So for me, it's all about time management and making sure that I'm getting my time in here and not slacking off, because I do have all of that time where I have to be at work.
And what's next for you? I know that you sort of completed this round of paintings that are on view in our gallery, and then also for the other show that you're involved in right now. And so what's next?
Next for me is I'm gonna work more on like new ways of making these paintings. So kind of like what we were just talking about with the Ziploc film filtering, trying to make new ways of seeing things. And then also we talked about last time kind of treating the canvas and the painting as like a window and almost keeping a frame in there and just making like more intimate works that make you have to peer in a little bit closer.
Mm-hmm. Well, I look forward to seeing those. I'm sure those are going to be fantastic too. I'm a really big fan of your work.
Thank you.
I'm really happy to have them in the gallery. One of the things that was interesting about your paintings, and really all the paintings in this exhibit, from deep within, but yours in particular, is the way they interact with Leslie E. Wise show on the main floor, Winter Spring, and you can see from the backdrop, the gallery, that the colors of your paintings, and I purposely curated them to have shapes that were similar to the bird below them. So the green and orange one over here in front of the green and orange bird, and the blue one, the one that has the wings going where the wings are sweeping up. And it just was really
Yeah.
very delightful.
I really appreciate that too. I think that their work downstairs has like this whimsical kind of like dreaminess to it, and that's kind of like on the same wavelength of what I'm trying to do with my paintings too. So I think that's really cool.
And the color spectrum as well. I think that those are contemporary colors. I think that those are colors that are really prolific on places where people are consuming imagery like Instagram.
Yeah.
These incredibly neon tropical colors are trending or whatever.
Yeah.
Mhm. They're very relatable at this time.
Yes, I
Well,
agree.
I just want to ask you one more question. So, what advice do you have for other young people or anyone out there who's working full time and, trying to get somewhere with their artwork and trying to make a name for themselves in the art world? What advice would you give them?
So if you're coming straight out of school, I guess my advice to them would to put yourself out there and make sure that you're talking to people. When I was in school, I got a job as an intern at a gallery because I am really shy and I'm not good at talking to people. And that was something that forced me to talk to people that I normally wouldn't talk to and get out of my comfort zone. And just making sure that you're out going to galleries and seeing things because that's the only way that you're going to meet people and move forward and make people know who you are. So I guess my advice is just make sure you have a voice and you're being heard.
I think that's excellent advice. Alyssa, thank you so much for being with us
Thank
and
you.
taking time to talk more about your artwork. And we wish you nothing but the best.
Thank you.